The Montana sun beat down mercilessly on the open plains, turning the tall grass a brittle yellow-brown that crackled underfoot. August 1876 had been particularly unforgiving, with not a drop of rain for nearly 3 weeks. Even the morning dew had abandoned the land. Thomas Blackwood wiped the sweat from his brow with a bandana that had long since been soaked through. His horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Scout, plodded forward with heavy steps. They'd been riding for nearly 2 days straight, pushing hard to reach the settlement of Clearwater before his supplies ran out completely. "Just a bit further, boy," Thomas murmured, patting Scout's neck. The horse's coat was slick with sweat, his breathing labored. Thomas glanced down at his canteen. Less than a quarter full, but it would have to last them both until they reached water again. At 42, Thomas had spent most of his life on the frontier. The lines etched deeply into his sun-weathered face told stories of harsh winters and scorching summers, of cattle drives and skirmishes. His deep-set blue eyes had witnessed the transformation of the West, for better and worse. After the war, he'd come west looking for something, peace, perhaps, or forgetting. Instead, he'd found purpose working as a scout and cattle driver, moving between ranches and settlements. Now he was headed to Clearwater with news of a cattle sale, carrying papers that needed to reach the Montgomery ranch by tomorrow. The shortcut he'd taken through Broken Ridge had been a mistake. The terrain was rougher than he remembered, and the water holes he'd counted on finding had dried up. Thomas squinted at the horizon, where heat waves distorted the landscape. Something caught his eye, an irregular shape against the sea of grass. He reined Scout to a stop and reached for his field glasses. A figure lay motionless about a half-mile ahead. "Easy now," he told Scout as they approached cautiously. Out here, caution meant survival. The Indian wars were still fresh in everyone's mind, though this territory had been relatively peaceful lately. As they drew closer, Thomas could make out a man lying face down in the grass. From his clothing and long black hair, he was clearly Native American, Blackfoot, most likely, given their location. Blood had soaked through the back of the man's deerskin shirt. Thomas dismounted, keeping his rifle ready, but not aimed. "Hello there," he called out. "You alive?" A weak groan answered him. The man tried to turn his head, revealing a young face, perhaps no more than 20 years old. His dark eyes were glazed with pain and dehydration. "Water," the young man rasped in English. Thomas hesitated, hand going to his canteen. Every instinct of survival on the frontier told him to be careful, to preserve his resources. There was no telling if he'd find water before reaching Clearwater, still a day's ride away. Without water, neither he nor Scout would make it. But something in the young man's eyes, a fading light that Thomas recognized all too well from the war, made his decision for him. "Here," Thomas said, kneeling beside him and gently lifting his head. He uncorked the canteen and held it to the man's parched lips. "Not too fast now." The young man drank gratefully, his eyes never leaving Thomas's face. When he'd had enough, Thomas carefully examined his wound. A bullet had torn through his shoulder, missing anything vital, but leaving him weak from blood loss and exposure. "My name's Thomas Blackwood," he said, tearing strips from his spare shirt to bandage the wound. "What's yours?" "Running Elk," the young man replied, his voice slightly stronger. "Blackfoot." "What happened to you, Running Elk?" Running Elk winced as Thomas tightened the bandage. "Traitors. They thought I stole from them. I did not." Thomas nodded, not pressing further. The frontier was rife with such misunderstandings, often with deadly consequences. "Can you ride? I can't leave you out here." "My people." Running Elk gestured weakly northward. "Camp is there. Not far." Thomas looked in the direction indicated, seeing nothing but empty prairie. "How far?" "Half-day's ride." Thomas looked down at his now empty canteen, then at Scout, who stood with head hanging low from exhaustion. They wouldn't make it to Clearwater now, not without water. But the Blackfoot camp might be closer. "All right," Thomas decided, helping Running Elk to his feet. "We'll find your people." As Thomas helped the wounded man onto Scout, he wondered if he'd just made the most foolish decision of his frontier life, or perhaps the most human. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the vast Montana sky in hues of orange and pink. Thomas walked alongside Scout, leading the horse by the reins while Running Elk slumped in the saddle. The young Blackfoot man drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling directions that kept them headed northward. Thomas's mouth felt like sandpaper, his tongue swollen from thirst. He'd given the last of his water to Running Elk and the horse. The important papers for the Montgomery ranch weighed heavy in his saddlebag, a constant reminder of his responsibility. By helping Running Elk, he was almost certainly going to be late, possibly costing the rancher a significant deal. "Why help me?" Running Elk asked during a moment of clarity, his voice barely audible above the whisper of the prairie grass. Many white men would leave Blackfoot to die. Thomas was silent for a long moment. "Saw too many men die in the war," he finally said. "Both sides. Made me wonder what we're fighting for sometimes." Running Elk nodded weakly. "My father says the same. He fought bluecoats long ago." As the light faded, Thomas began to worry. They had been traveling for hours, with no sign of the Blackfoot camp. Running Elk's condition was deteriorating, and without water, they wouldn't last another day in this heat. Just as desperation began to set in, they crested a small rise, and Thomas spotted a thin line of cottonwood trees in the distance, a sure sign of water. Relief washed over him. "There's a creek ahead," he told Running Elk. "We'll rest there for the night." By the time they reached the creek, twilight had deepened into dusk. The water was low but still flowing, a blessing in the drought-stricken land. Thomas helped Running Elk down from Scout and gently propped him against a cottonwood trunk before letting the horse drink. After they had all quenched their thirst, Thomas built a small fire and tended to Running Elk's wound. The bleeding had stopped, but infection was a risk. "This creek," Running Elk said, gesturing weakly at the water. "It leads to my people's camp. Follow it tomorrow." Thomas nodded, offering him some jerky from his dwindling supplies. "Rest now. We'll move at first light." As night fell completely, bringing a blanket of stars overhead, Thomas kept watch. The vastness of the territory made a man feel small, a speck in the grand scheme of things. Out here, the feuds between settlers and natives, the political machinations back east, they all seemed distant and somehow less important than the simple act of helping a fellow human survive. He thought of his brother James, lost at Antietam. Would someone on the Confederate side have shown him mercy if they'd found him wounded? He liked to think so. Thomas was startled from his thoughts by a soft voice. Running Elk was singing quietly in his native tongue, a melodic chant that seemed to rise and fall like the wind through the grass. "A prayer," Running Elk explained, noticing Thomas's attention. "For safe journey." Thomas nodded respectfully. "Your English is good." "Mission school," Running Elk replied. 3 years. Before I returned to my people." They fell into conversation as the fire crackled between them. Running Elk spoke of his father, a respected elder named Stone Bear, and of the challenges his people faced as settlers pushed farther into their traditional hunting grounds. Thomas shared stories of his time as a Union soldier, his journey west after the war, and the odd jobs that had sustained him since. "The world is changing," Running Elk observed, gazing at the stars. "My father says we must change too, or vanish like morning mist." "Wise man," Thomas replied. "Change isn't easy, though." "No," Running Elk agreed, "but necessary." Dawn broke with a crimson splash across the eastern sky. Thomas awoke instantly, a habit formed from years on the frontier. Running Elk's fever had broken during the night, and his eyes were clearer when he opened them. After a meager breakfast of the last of Thomas's jerky, they continued following the creek northward. The water gave them strength, though hunger gnawed at their bellies. Scout seemed rejuvenated as well, walking with a steadier gait. By mid-morning, they spotted smoke rising in the distance. "My people," Running Elk confirmed, sitting straighter in the saddle. Thomas felt a flutter of apprehension. He would be entering a Blackfoot camp alone, a white man in a time of tension between their peoples. But he had come this far. "Let's go meet your father," he said, guiding Scout toward the rising smoke. The Blackfoot camp appeared gradually as they approached, a collection of high teepees arranged in a semicircle along the creek, smoke rising from cooking fires. Dogs barked, announcing their arrival, and within moments, mounted warriors approached at a gallop, rifles and bows at the ready. Thomas raised his hand slowly, palms open. "Easy now," he murmured to Scout, who shifted nervously beneath Running Elk. "Father." Running Elk called out in his native tongue, then switched to English. "Tell them I am here. Tell them this man helped me." The warriors surrounded them, faces stern and suspicious. One man, older than the rest with gray streaks in his long black hair, pushed his horse forward. He wore a fringed buckskin shirt adorned with intricate beadwork and carried himself with unmistakable authority. "My son," the man said, his deep voice revealing both relief and concern. "What has happened to you?" "Traitors shot me, father. Left me to die on the plains," Running Elk explained. "This man, Thomas Blackwood, he gave me his last water and brought me home." Stone Bear studied Thomas intently, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, he nodded once. "Bring them to camp," he ordered the warriors. "The white man is under my protection." The reception at the camp was a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Women paused in their work to watch as Thomas was led to Stone Bear's large teepee at the center of the camp. Children peeked from behind their mother's skirts, pointing and whispering. Some of the older men regarded him with open hostility. Inside the teepee, Running Elk was carefully laid on a bed of furs, while a medicine woman examined his wound. Stone Bear motioned for Thomas to sit across from him by the central fire. "My son says you gave him your last water," Stone Bear said, his English heavily accented but clear. "Why would you do this? Our peoples are not friends." Thomas considered his answer carefully. "Out there," he gestured toward the plains beyond the teepee. "It doesn't matter what color a man's skin is or what god he prays to. We all bleed the same, get thirsty the same." Stone Bear nodded slowly, something like approval flickering in his dark eyes. "You have papers," he said, surprising Thomas. "My son told me. Important papers for the cattle ranch." "Yes," Thomas confirmed. "They're already late." "We will help you deliver them," Stone Bear declared. "When my son is stronger." 2 days. Thomas hesitated. "That's generous, but the Montgomery Ranch is a hard day's ride south from here." "Montgomery," Stone Bear repeated, his expression darkening. "This man takes more land each season, pushes his cattle onto our hunting grounds." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Thomas didn't know what to say. The old chief wasn't wrong. Benjamin Montgomery was known for his aggressive expansion, using his wealth and connections to acquire more land each year, often at the expense of native claims. The medicine woman finished tending to Running Elk and spoke rapidly to Stone Bear in their native language. The chief nodded and turned back to Thomas. "My son will recover," he translated. "Thanks to you." Thomas was given food, dried buffalo meat, wild berries, and a corn paste that tasted better than it looked. After days of near starvation, it was the finest meal he could remember. He was then shown to a small teepee where he could rest. That evening, Stone Bear called a council. Thomas was invited to sit among the tribal elders, an unusual honor for an outsider. As the pipe was passed around the circle, Stone Bear spoke of Thomas's act of kindness toward Running Elk. Thomas understood little of what was said in the Blackfoot language, but the solemn nods and occasional glances in his direction made the sentiment clear. When the pipe reached Thomas, he took it carefully, following the ritual as best he could. The sweet smoke filled his lungs, and for a moment, the barriers of language and culture seemed to fade. Later, as the council dispersed, Running Elk, now sitting up and looking remarkably improved, translated for Thomas. "My father has decided something important," he explained. "Tomorrow, he will send riders to all Blackfoot camps in the territory. He will tell them of what you did." "That's not necessary," Thomas said, uncomfortable with the attention. Running Elk smiled faintly. "To us it is. Water is life on the plains. You gave your life water to save an enemy. This is a story that must be told." As Thomas lay in the guest teepee that night, listening to the sounds of the camp settling into slumber, he wondered what Montgomery would say when he finally delivered those papers. The deal would almost certainly be lost, and with it, Thomas's reputation for reliability. Yet somehow, lying there among people who by all accounts should have been his adversaries, Thomas Blackwood felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Peace. The dawn broke cool and clear over the Blackfoot camp. Thomas emerged from his teepee to find unusual activity throughout the settlement. Warriors were painting their horses with ceremonial symbols, women were preparing travel rations, and messengers were mounting up, preparing to ride in different directions. Stone Bear approached, dressed in full ceremonial attire, a magnificent war bonnet trailing eagle feathers down his back, a beaded breastplate gleaming in the morning light. "Today we ride to Montgomery Ranch," he announced. "I have sent word to other bands. They will meet us on the way." Thomas felt a knot form in his stomach. "Chief Stone Bear, I appreciate the escort, but I don't want to cause trouble. Montgomery won't take kindly to a large group of Blackfoot approaching his ranch." Stone Bear's expression remained impassive. "No trouble. We come in peace, to honor a man of peace." He gestured to Running Elk, who was being helped onto his horse, his wounded shoulder carefully bound. "My son says your papers are important. We will make sure they arrive." Within the hour, they were riding south, Thomas, Running Elk, Stone Bear, and 20 Blackfoot warriors. Thomas noticed that while they carried weapons, their rifles were not loaded, and their bows remained in cases, a deliberate sign of peaceful intentions. As they rode, Thomas and Running Elk talked. The young man's strength was returning, though he still rode with obvious discomfort. "My father rarely leaves our territory these days," Running Elk explained. "For him to ride to a white man's ranch, this is unprecedented." "I'm worried about how Montgomery will react," Thomas admitted. "He's not known for his understanding nature." Running Elk smiled faintly. "That is why we come, to show him another way." By midday, they crested a hill and were met with an astonishing sight. Waiting in the valley below were dozens of Blackfoot riders from other bands, their horses standing patiently in the summer heat. As Stone Bear's group approached, a murmur went through the assembled warriors. "They have come," Running Elk said with quiet pride. "All of them." Thomas estimated there were well over 100 riders gathered now. As they joined the larger group, he was introduced to other chiefs and important figures. Each nodded respectfully to him, many touching their hands to their hearts in salute. Stone Bear addressed the assembled warriors in their native tongue. When he finished, Running Elk translated for Thomas. He told them of your kindness. He says that in times of drought, water is more precious than gold, yet you gave yours freely to save one who was not your brother by blood. He says that today we ride to honor a true warrior, one who conquers not with weapons, but with compassion. Thomas felt a flush of embarrassment. "I just did what anyone would do." Running Elk shook his head. "No, not anyone. That is why this matters." They continued south, a column of Blackfoot warriors stretching nearly half a mile, riding in dignified silence. As they crossed the boundary of Montgomery Ranch land, marked by a crude wooden sign, Thomas felt his anxiety rise. Any other day, such a large group of Native Americans would be met with alarm and likely gunfire. By late afternoon, they approached the ranch house, a sprawling two-story structure surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses. Cattle grazed on the surrounding hillsides, and the sounds of ranch work filled the air, until someone spotted them. A bell began clanging frantically. Ranch hands rushed for weapons. Thomas saw men taking positions behind wagons, windows, and water troughs, rifles aimed at the approaching column. "Wait," Thomas called out, urging Scout forward ahead of the others. "Hold your fire. We come in peace." Benjamin Montgomery himself emerged from the main house, a shotgun in his hands. A barrel-chested man, with a thick gray beard and cold eyes, he had built his ranch through ruthless determination and little regard for those who stood in his way. "Blackwood," he shouted in disbelief. "What in God's name is this?" Thomas rode forward alone, the papers held visibly in his hand. "I've brought the cattle sale documents, Mr. Montgomery." Montgomery's eyes narrowed as he scanned the assembled Blackfoot warriors. "You're 4 days late, and you bring an army to my doorstep? Have you lost your mind?" They're not here to fight, Thomas explained, dismounting slowly. They're here to honor a promise. The papers are signed. The deal is still good if you want it. Montgomery snatched the documents from Thomas's hand, scanning them quickly. His expression shifted from anger to grudging satisfaction. Despite the delay, the sale terms were exceptionally favorable. Why are they really here, Blackwood? Montgomery asked, his voice lower now. Before Thomas could answer, Stone Bear dismounted and approached, his dignity commanding respect even from a man like Montgomery. Running Elk followed, translating his father's words. My father says he has come to witness the completion of your business, and to tell you that Thomas Blackwood is a friend of the Blackfoot people. He says that friendship between our peoples is possible, if we choose it. Montgomery's weathered face revealed his skepticism, but something in Stone Bear's steady gaze gave him pause. Behind them, more riders were appearing on the horizon. The standoff at Montgomery Ranch stretched into a tense silence. Ranch hands kept their rifles trained on the assembled Blackfoot warriors, while the native riders sat calmly on their horses, making no threatening moves. More Blackfoot continued to arrive, until nearly 300 warriors surrounded the ranch at a respectful distance. Never in the history of the territory had such a gathering occurred without bloodshed following. Benjamin Montgomery broke the silence. I don't know what game you're playing, Blackwood, but I want these Indians off my land. Now. Thomas stood his ground. They're not here to fight, Mr. Montgomery. They've come to honor a debt and deliver me safely with your papers. What debt? Montgomery demanded. Running Elk stepped forward, his wounded shoulder evident beneath his bandage. Thomas Blackwood found me dying on the plains. He gave me his last water when he had none to spare. He carried me to my people when his mission was to bring these papers to you. Montgomery's eyes narrowed. So you're the reason he's late? Yes, Running Elk acknowledged without apology. And now we have come to ensure his word is kept. My father believes that honorable men must recognize honor in others, even those who look different or speak different words to the Great Spirit. Stone Bear spoke again, his deep voice carrying across the ranch yard as Running Elk translated. My father says, we have fought the white man for many seasons. We have lost hunting grounds and seen our children go hungry. But today, we do not come for war. We come because one man showed that there can be another way. A murmur ran through the ranch hands. Several lowered their rifles slightly, glancing uncertainly at Montgomery. Thomas looked Montgomery directly in the eye. The drought has hit everyone hard this year. Your ranch, the Blackfoot, every settlement for 100 miles. We can keep fighting over what's left, or we can find a way to share the land that sustains us all. Montgomery's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he seemed to wrestle with himself, decades of frontier prejudice, warring with the undeniable reality before him. The deal's still good, Thomas added quietly, and having the Blackfoot as allies rather than enemies could mean the difference between your ranch surviving the drought or failing. Montgomery looked from Thomas to Stone Bear, then to the hundreds of warriors waiting silently beyond. Finally, he tucked the papers into his vest pocket. I'll accept the delivery, he said gruffly. Though you're still late, Blackwood. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Thomas nodded gratefully. What happened next would be told and retold across the territory for years to come. Stone Bear raised his hand at a signal. As one, every Blackfoot warrior removed the eagle feather or ceremonial item from his headband or hair. Then, in perfect unison, they lowered these sacred items toward Thomas in the traditional Blackfoot salute of highest respect, a gesture normally reserved only for the greatest of chiefs or the bravest of warriors. 300 of the proudest warriors of the plains, lowering their sacred emblems to honor a simple cowboy who had shared his water with an enemy. Even Montgomery fell silent at the spectacle. Stone Bear spoke again, this time in halting English so all could understand. Today, we make new path. Not war path. Life path. Water shared means life shared. He turned to Montgomery. Your cattle need water. Our people need to hunt. Perhaps we find way for both. Montgomery shifted uncomfortably, but years of frontier pragmatism won out. I suppose we could discuss grazing rights along the eastern creek. It was a small concession, but in the context of frontier relations, it was revolutionary. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, an unexpected transformation took place. Montgomery's wife, a practical woman who had survived 25 years on the frontier, emerged from the house with coffee pots and cups. "No sense standing out here all night," she declared, giving her husband a pointed look. "If we're talking, we might as well have coffee." Slowly, cautiously, barriers began to lower. Ranch hands put aside their rifles. Blackfoot warriors dismounted. Stone Bear and Montgomery sat across from each other on the porch, mapping out territories on a crude drawing in the dirt. Thomas found Running Elk watching the proceedings, with a mixture of hope and wariness. "Will it last?" Thomas asked him quietly. Running Elk shrugged his good shoulder. "Perhaps not. Old hatreds run deep, but it is a beginning." As night fell completely, fires were lit in the ranch yard. The Blackfoot women, who had followed the warriors, prepared a simple meal to share. Children, both white and native, watched each other with curious eyes across the firelight. Thomas Blackwood sat apart, watching the unlikely gathering with a sense of wonder. His canteen, refilled now, hung at his side, a humble vessel that had somehow changed the course of history in this small corner of the frontier. Water or blood? The choice had always been there, though few had seen it clearly. One canteen of water, freely given, had tipped the balance toward life.